The year is 1861. On April 12th, cannons thunder at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The American Civil War has begun. For the next 4 years, Americans will fight Americans. More than 620,000 will die. By the time it ends, more Americans will have died in this war than in all the other wars the nation would fight for the next 150 years combined. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Global War on Terror. All of them. But even today, people still argue about what caused it and what it was really about. Was it just about slavery, or was it something deeper? It's me, and this is Crash Course. In the 1800s, America looked very different than it does today. Back then, the nation was split right down the middle, between the interests of the North and the interests of the South. The North was rapidly modernizing and industrializing, while the South stayed largely agricultural. And in the South, life revolved around huge plantations that grew cash crops like tobacco and rice, and most importantly, cotton. But growing cotton required lots of labor, and since the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, which made it much easier to separate the seeds from the cotton, the demand for labor on these plantations increased dramatically. So the southern states bought and sold millions of enslaved people. By 1860, the South was producing 50% of the world's cotton, and 3.5 million people were enslaved in the southern states. But slavery was more than just an economic system. It was a way of life. Planters saw themselves as the natural aristocracy of the nation, superior to the other classes of white society. And they worried that if slavery were to end, their way of life would end, too. Over the decades, as the nation grew, the question of slavery in new territories became a political lightning rod. As more free states joined the Union, Southerners feared that their power in the federal government would eventually disappear. So again and again, politicians made temporary deals. Whenever a new territory wanted to join the United States, they would admit it as either a free state or a slave state to keep the balance of power between the two sides equal. But no one thought this system would last forever. In the 1850s, as more and more people moved west, there were more opportunities to make new territories and more chances for the balance to tip. Both sides dug in their heels. Abolitionists in the North demanded slavery be ended everywhere. Pro-slavery advocates in the South wanted it protected. Then, in 1860, a man named Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Lincoln was against slavery, but as a politician from a border state, he also understood its complexities. He took a moderate approach, opposing the expansion of slavery into new territories, but not necessarily calling for its abolition. But Southerners didn't see this as moderate. They saw him as a threat. One by one, they began to secede from the Union. By February 1861, 7 states had left. Together, they formed the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as its first and only president. When news of the Confederacy reached President Lincoln, he knew he had to act. Although the United States had never before dissolved, Lincoln argued that secession was illegal. The Union was perpetual. A state couldn't just leave. But the South had already taken steps to protect itself. Confederate troops had seized federal property in the South and established their own military. And as tensions grew, a delegation from the Confederacy asked Lincoln to return the property. Lincoln refused. Instead, he decided to send supplies to Fort Sumter in South Carolina, an isolated federal installation surrounded by Confederate troops. It was basically a powder keg waiting to explode. On April 1861, Confederate forces opened fire. The fort's commander, Major Robert Anderson, surrendered 2 days later. And in that moment, fighting broke out across the South. By the end of the month, 40,000 soldiers in gray uniforms and 16,000 soldiers in blue had clashed in battle. Brother fought brother. Families were divided. People across the nation grappled with the question, what side were you on? Over the next 4 years, the nation would be engulfed in violence. At the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, the bloodiest single day in American history, over 22,000 men fell. By July 1863, after 3 days of fighting, the Confederate forces were turned back at Gettysburg. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared enslaved people in rebel states free. It changed the nature of the war. Now it was a fight for freedom, not just a fight for union. But by 1865, the Confederacy was exhausted. Its troops had been defeated at sea and on land. In April, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The Union was preserved. Slavery was abolished, but the scars would last for generations. In the years after the war, the United States grappled with what to do next. The South was in ruins. The economy was shattered. Former slaves were free, but they still faced discrimination and violence. Over the next century, African Americans would continue to fight for civil rights in the face of Jim Crow laws and segregation. But that's a story for another time. The American Civil War ended slavery, but it didn't end racism. But it did reshape America and raise a question that still lingers today. How can a deeply divided people stay united? Thanks for watching this episode, which was filmed at a studio and was made with the help of all these nice people. If you want to help keep this content free for everyone forever, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform.